Hi, virtual connection attendees. We're really excited today to talk with you about containers and how we believe the next-gen technology is changing the landscape for the enterprise. Specifically, Matt Erickson and myself, Geeta Vigala, we're going to talk to you about how you navigate the world of containers and how we think about that within Commvault by leveraging the portfolio to store, protect, and migrate your container workloads. So as we think about what's changing from a market perspective, there are many numbers out there from analysts showcasing the market trends. We're significantly seeing the number of cloud-native developers go up, and this really gives credence to the fact that technologies like containers are gaining mainstream momentum. We're also seeing a lot of alignment with Kubernetes becoming the de facto standard for automating and orchestrating all of your container workloads. And we're seeing, particularly with CNCF and other organizations and consortiums, alignment there so that we're starting to get to a point where we're seeing a simplicity in the model in which enterprises are adopting containers. And lastly, we're seeing adoption by global enterprises to use containers faster and in production workloads much quicker than we've historically seen technology pick up. And what I mean by that is historically we saw a technology on about a decade worth of timeline where it started out in a test dev-like environment before it got to production. And we're seeing a compression in that timeline, really giving a lot more focus to containers specifically in the enterprise of how to adopt those capabilities, how to ensure that they're integrated in a seamless way, and how to make sure that those technologies can be used to reap benefits to the business, whether that be faster time to market, more agility in the way that the organization behaves, and more results to outperform competition. One thing that we've noticed from our enterprise customers is containers are no longer a silo of their own. So while we talk about containers as being a next-gen technology, there is also a layer here that we need to consider in terms of the infrastructure and being able to support containers as another workload that both complements and allows traditional workloads to onboard into the container ecosystem. So we've seen a lot of customers look at virtualized workloads moving to containerization. And what this means is we are hearing from our customers that we no longer want a siloed solution that solves for containers separately. We want it as part of our mainstream production environment so that we can really scale it, we can get the economies of scale, we can get the simplicity in management, and really reap those TCO benefits. So when we think about challenges for the enterprise, we really see these in 5 specific categories. Enterprise resilience is the first one, and this really resonates with the enterprise customers that have had a delivery model, whether that's an SLA-based one or an uptime one, but it's really providing the fact that customers want the confidence that their enterprise workloads are protected, they're stored, and they're being able to use those on a delivery mechanism that still meets those SLAs or resilience metrics that they used to historically measure against. And so when we think about that within our portfolio, both whether it's store, protecting, or even now migrating, it's really using the experience that Commvault has had through the decades of our technologies and being able to adopt those so that it onboards the new capabilities with containers, but it doesn't give up on those resilience factors. For application mobility, this really has become real as we think about where applications and data are now stored. So historically, everybody lived on-prem, you had your own data center, it was a very controlled environment, and mobility really wasn't a thing. Now if we look at where the pendulum has swung, we've gone from on-prem to off-prem to somewhere in the middle now where we've got multi and hybrid cloud becoming a reality for most of the enterprises. And that's really given credence to the fact that application mobility is within reach. You can really have your application based on where you need it. And whether that's leveraging capabilities from a public cloud, whether that's the security 4 walls that you want in your on-prem data center, or whether that's in the future at the edge, when we think about application mobility, we recognize that an application is no longer a monolithic blob. It's made up of various different pieces, whether that's secret keys, whether that's a manifest, whether it's the persistent volume. But when you're thinking about moving that application, you need to think about holistically moving that from place to place. So you're taking advantage of the mobility, but not compromising on any of the resilience or the enterprise features you may be looking for. Unified management really goes back to what I started out talking about. We don't want to look at this as a point product solution. We're not expecting the enterprise to form a separate team, a separate DevOps engineering group, a separate platform ops engineering group that looks after just containers. This needs to seamlessly fold in as part of your overall workflow. And when we think about unified management, we look at this from two perspectives. We look at the new personas we're looking to support, like the DevOps engineer and what they may be looking for the seamless integration. And then we look for the platform ops or IT departments who really want to look for the unified management where they're looking after containers as well as everything else. And this really goes back to supporting the different personas, but providing simplicity in management. Scale and cost really analogous to each other. As we design for scale, that really gives us more and more benefits around cost optimization, whether that's in terms of keeping the cost itself low, whether that means allowing the scale and the economy of scale to kick in, or whether that means the simplicity in management and the overall overhead in being able to manage and support these solutions. So again, as we think about the 5 different pillars we're looking to solve for, that's what we're focused on here. So I talked about these 5 different points, and I threw in their various personas as we're thinking about containers specifically as a next-gen technology onboarding. And there are really 2 inflection points that we consider to make containers successful. The first one is that technology inflection. And this is, there's this new shiny object. I want to play with it. Perhaps I want to start with it in a test dev environment. I want to see what this technology has to offer. And we look at that as the technology inflection point. And this is all about lowering the barrier to entry. So simplifying how a DevOps engineer may support persistent volumes through a native Kubernetes environment, for instance. It's also thinking about it from an application-first philosophy. And what that means is historically we saw an environment where you were served an enterprise-grade solution. You were served some storage, for instance, and it had certain things turned on. It had compression, and it hit dedupe, and it was pinned to flash, or whatever. But what we're seeing now is really the application that's the differentiator within the organization. So being able to define the characteristics of the infrastructure to align with what the application needs, we see that as being a large point when we think about technology inflection. And ultimately, these both yield faster time to results. If we've got a very clear swim lane on what is the outcome, what's the success criteria, and what does the infrastructure need to solve for to make this application successful, that's where we believe that we're delivering against that technology inflection point to serve a seamless user, in this case, the DevOps engineer. The second point here is around maturity. If we think about virtualization as sort of the predecessor of ubiquitous enterprise standards, what we saw with virtualization is it started out with virtualized compute. Okay, great, that solves the problem for me. The portfolio then expanded to cover virtualized networking, virtualized storage, and so we started to get almost a consolidated solution that looked across the different parts of infrastructure to solve for virtualization. Then we saw a couple of years later, really the enterprise resilience kick in. And this kind of aligns with the acquisition of VMware. But what we saw was things like scale, things like manageability, TCO. Those benefits really started to be put into the product line. And that's where we saw the larger enterprises being able to take the value of the technology, package it up in this enterprise form factor, and be able to use it for production or tier 1, tier 0 workloads. So as we look at containers, we really expect the same thing. The only difference here is that we're seeing a significant compression in that timeline. The time between the technology mature and the inflection point is much shorter now. So as you're thinking about a solution that's solving for technology, bear in mind you also need to be starting to think about the maturity inflection point because it's coming right at you to really be able to solve for these solutions. Before we go into sort of telling you about how the portfolio is broken up and how we believe we're solving for these various components, we're going to take you through a couple of demos for the store, protect, and migrate components of our portfolio to show you how we believe that we've solved for this.
Let's start by looking at the store part of our portfolio. This is with Hedwig Distributed Storage. We'll look at how we can automatically migrate and replicate data from one site to another. Here you can see Site 1. where we're defining a storage class where we're adding the destination, so this is for our DR, by the migration location. We're also using attributes like a 5-minute snapshot scheduling policy. We could define other attributes here to make it more application-centric, whether that's encryption, pinning the workload to flash, etc. We're now submitting through Kubernetes Scheduler to orchestrate automatically and protect and replicate. You can see now that the application is running. This was all done through the native DevOps engineer's workflow without leaving their native environment. For your platform ops team who may want to see this through the native Hedwig web UI, this is also available.
Protecting Kubernetes means collecting both persistent data and config or manifests to allow recovery. You can select individual apps or volumes, but selecting a namespace will auto-discover and protect all apps within that namespace. Label selectors are used by devs to indicate app state, like dev or production. Commvault can use these labels to auto-discover and protect, and as developers update the app, Commvault auto-tunes protection to the correct policy. Recovery is fine-grained too, with volume, manifests, or entire app recovery. And migration is as simple as recovering your protected application to another cluster, which restores both data and the collected config. This means cluster lifecycle and consolidation is both simplified and automated. Migration of Kubernetes applications occurs for lifecycle, consolidation, or just seeding a new cloud or cluster. Often the app name changes during migration, and then the destination cloud or cluster is selected. Migrated applications may be placed in a specific namespace and even change the destination storage class. In our example here, we have migrated a Postgres database originally protected on Amazon EKS to a new Google GKE cluster. We are using kubectl to validate that the new development application is in running state, which it looks like it is, and we're done. Okay, so what we just saw there in those demo videos was basically the ability for Commvault to be able to store your Kubernetes or cloud native data in a format that works for your developers, not just as a infrastructure block within your data center. And in fact, it doesn't just live within the data center, it lives both on-prem and in your clouds of choice. How to protect those workloads in a Kubernetes and cloud native way that then gives you the ability to migrate those workloads where you need them today or even tomorrow. And we do that with a differentiated portfolio that not only looks at the Kubernetes workloads, but all of the surrounding workloads that contribute to your business. So when you started adopting Kubernetes, you didn't throw away or shut down your cloud workloads or your VM workloads, or even those older physical server workloads that you have sitting in the corner of the data center. So with Commvault's current portfolio with Hedwig distributed storage that services both your Kubernetes or cloud native workloads and your traditional workloads, and then Metallic and or Commvault backup and recovery, you can protect these workloads and then effectively manage this data to where it needs to be when your business needs it to be there. And the when could be anything from application development needs to DR or to just seeding and testing with your next cloud. So what we're going to do now is Geeta's going to give us a bit of a look at what the store portfolio looks like and what you can actually do with Commvault's Hedwig distributed storage.
Thanks, Matt. So as Matt mentioned, Hedwig is our distributed storage piece of the portfolio. And one thing that I really want to impress upon you is, as a quick refresher, when we think about Hedwig, it was designed philosophically with multi-cloud and hybrid cloud in mind. And what that meant was there was an appreciation essentially for next-gen storage. So historically, like I'd opened and said, we lived in an on-prem world, there was a realization that distributed data was a reality for most enterprises. And so as we look at what Hedvig solves for, it's scalable. So it has transparent scale, it's software-defined in nature, which means the more resources you put underneath it, the file system essentially just scales with it and takes advantage of those resources. And again, it's transparent to whether it's living on-prem, in the cloud, your choice of cloud vendor, private cloud, public cloud, etc. It also supports multi-protocol. And again, this speaks volumes when we think about containers and really what's fueling that with the multi-hybrid cloud philosophy. So regardless of whether you're talking high-performance workloads that are traditionally block-centric, or you're talking about next-gen things like analytics-type workloads, which tend to be better aligned to object and metadata-rich environments, Hedvig solves for all of these, and it does this with a balance of solving for a large breadth portfolio, but having specific optimizations when it thinks about a particular application. And so specifically for containers, we've integrated natively for persistent volumes. Those can be created through Kubernetes. We also have persistent volume snapshots. So we're really taking advantage of CSI and everything that has to offer, including the extensions. We've thought about the mobility aspect. Now that your data and your applications are truly distributed, physically distributed, what does that mean against physics? And that's really thinking about when we're moving snapshots from one place to another, as you saw in the demo, how do we do that with a lightweight mechanism? So we have things like change block optimizations and other things to really limit the amount of data gravity resistance that you might cause. It's also multi-site snapshot enabled, which means you can again distribute those snapshots to any of the sites that you may have chosen, which really gives you the ability to have multiple designs in terms of your failover architecture. So you may have an on-prem primary data center, and you may have more than one DR centers that could be through various public clouds. So by choosing where you want the snapshots to go, how you want those rehydrated and used as part of your DR philosophy, is really where Hedvig is trying to provide a flexible foundation that gives you as the customer to optimize which technologies you use best suited for your environment, but aligned with standard philosophies, whether that's CSI, whether that's supporting the native integrations, etc. So that from the perspective of alignment with the market and where Kubernetes is becoming the de facto automation orchestration engine, you get that seamless workflow as part of what you see.
Okay, so let's take a look now at how to protect workloads. Now, that being said, Geeta just showed us how you can protect workloads with the enterprise-like features that you've come to know and love inside your data center today, like zero space snapshots and the ability to replicate those snapshots to another array or data center. But what does protection in a Kubernetes world look like? Well, there's a lot on the screen here, right? I'm sure if I ask everyone in the audience, what do you need to protect for Kubernetes? I'm going to get a mix of answers. I'm going to get I need to protect the infrastructure. I need to protect my Kubernetes clusters and master nodes and worker nodes. Absolutely, spot on. Then I'll also get I need to protect my applications, whether they be deployments, stateful sets, replica sets. Absolutely, the application is key in a Kubernetes world. But what sits underneath those applications? Persistent volumes, which we just heard about from Geeta, that can sit on top of Hedvig storage. And then there's all of those other elements that you can see sitting below that are those maturity elements that Geeta was talking about as virtualization matured, are now maturing and available in a Kubernetes world. So we've got network topologies and service accounts and role-based access and all of the things that go together to deliver a containerized platform capable of servicing everything from your tier 3 apps all the way up to those tier 0 apps that Geeta was talking about. But what's more interesting is there's everything else below that. And what we're seeing is that Kubernetes and containers are just an add-on to the enterprise right now. They are quite often businesses are deploying, the businesses that I talk to are deploying hybrid applications. So they will have a portion of that app sitting in Kubernetes and a portion staying inside VMs for now. And in order to remain protected so that you can recover your business services, you need to consider all of these. And certainly when I speak to financial organizations, they're very interested in being able to protect even that infrastructure level protection so that they can bring their business services back in the time that is expected of them. So it's that enterprise resilience that Geeta was talking about before. So what are all of these other things that surround your application today? So if we look at the life cycle of a traditional Kubernetes or containerized app, it starts out on the developer's workstation where they may have their Docker files and manifests that they're working on. And typically this is the first place that malware or ransomware hit. So you want to protect those endpoints. That data will likely get checked into your source code control system, being it, Git or Subversion or Mercurial. You want to protect your source code repositories. But those repositories are feeding into your continuous integration and deployment practices. And those practices are now being flagged as business critical functions now. They provide you the ability to service your customers and get fixes or new features to them. The output of your build processes is one or many container images, and so you need to protect those registries. And then finally, you need to protect your Kubernetes applications, whether that be, secrets, deployments, custom resource definitions, and your persistent volumes. And then finally, as Geeta was saying, as your applications transition from, traditional block mode architectures or NAS or file-based persistent stores to object store, you're going to want to protect those new storage areas, which are your cloud-based object stores. Commvault protects all of these today, and what we really want you to consider as you start adopting and maturing your containerization and application modernization is consider all of the data that goes together to deliver that business outcome. And in a DevOps world, that now doesn't just mean the application. It means all of those surrounding systems that help you deliver that capability. One of the learnings from the recent KubeCon events is you still do occasionally have the developer push the fix out Friday night without going through a code review because it's not going to do any damage, right? And when some damage does occur, the only way that you can get back is to protect all of these different data types. So what do you need to do to start protecting? Well, Commvault has a software as a service product called Metallic VM and Kubernetes Backup. So what does that mean for you? It means zero setup. It means zero infrastructure, build, configure, and maintain. It means zero upfront costs. You simply sign up to the service and start protecting both your virtualized VMware and Hyper-V workloads and even your VMC workloads. And now your Kubernetes clusters, whether they reside on-prem or in cloud. And so what this means is it means you get to focus on the things that are the core competency for your business, right? Building new solutions for your customers, and you leave the monitoring and management of data protection to Commvault. And we really developed this based on listening to our customers that said, we just want the easy button, right? We know that you are the leader in the market in data protection and intelligent data management. Please come and do it for us. And so we delivered Metallic. And effectively, this allows your business to start protecting containerized applications faster because you don't need to skill up your IT teams or your teams that are responsible for data management. Because with Metallic and Commvault, it's as simple as enter your cluster and Commvault will discover the applications and start protecting. So what is it that Commvault actually does? And this is Commvault All Metallic. So we protect any CNCF certified Kubernetes distribution. And there was 148 of them, I think, the last time I checked. And what this means is flexibility and choice for your developers. The same, we use the container storage interface to talk to your underlying storage systems and provide snapshot-based backup. And this allows you to use modernized software-defined distributed storage like Hedvig, or leverage your internal on-prem investments like your NetApp arrays or VMware systems that like VMware Tanzu that now have their own storage subsystems for containerization. We can integrate with the applications that are running within your containers to make sure that your backups are taken in a consistent method or application integrated method. And ultimately, this allows you to recover a containerized application back to the original location or migrate it to another cluster or another namespace if you're setting up a new team or a new development initiative. So Commvault validates with the leading both distributions and cloud services, which you can see there. But we do not require you to wait for us to actually validate this. That's the benefit of the Cloud Native Computing, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. They're doing that certification work already. So we've been talking a lot about DevOps today. If DevOps is new to your organization, it's a little scary. It's happening very quickly. It's putting the developers in complete control of provisioning whatever infrastructure they require in the time frames that they require it. And how do you stay in touch with all of that? In the past, you would set up backup policies, you would onboard applications, which included adding them to the backup and running through a onboarding or a production checklist. Well, Commvault uses both namespaces and label selectors to automatically detect containerized applications. Your developers are already labeling their applications. And as you can see on the screen here, as an application migrates from dev to QA to prod, they will label and relabel that application as it progresses through the development cycle through to end production state. Commvault will observe these labels and back up the application in accordance with your business needs. So let's say keeping 3 backups for development, but keeping 30 days and a copy offsite for your production. So this is how you deal with the speed and scale of Kubernetes and containerized development without having to add any headcount, which is huge. So migration. We've talked a little bit about how mobile Kubernetes applications are because they are driven and developed underneath an open API. But what does migration mean in a Kubernetes world, right? Is migration still a infrastructure problem like the days of old when we poured everything out of a storage array into another storage array? Or should you only really be considering the application itself?
It's infrastructure, right?
Well, we shall see. We shall see. I think the answer might be both. So, what are you thinking, Geeta?
Well, when I think about infrastructure, I think historically we've thought about migration as moving wholesale from one place to another. It was a lift and shift model. And now I think when we think about migration, it's in this new modern world where everything is distributed, but it still has a dependency on the infrastructure. You know, we talked about this persistent volume. Well, if you're moving your applications and they're migrating, what about persistent volume? Isn't that an infrastructure question?
I think, yeah, I think there are instances where I speak to businesses and they are driven by the capability of their infrastructure. So when they select, next generation, modernized, cloud native storage like Hedvig, they know that they can design their application with data in multiple locations from day one, right? When they write to New York, they're going to immediately get a copy in Tokyo. And that allows them to build distributed application architectures that can leverage the fact that that copy exists. But I also speak to the businesses that are very application focused. And what they want is they want the ability to pick up their Kubernetes application, and that consists of a bunch of config data like the manifest files that describe the application and how it communicates with the big bad external world out there that customers are coming in from, and then the persistent data sitting underneath that. And quite often those businesses want to know that they can pick that application up in New York, for example, and seed or create a copy of that application in Tokyo, as per my example, but they may choose that the copy in Tokyo is a development copy. So they don't necessarily want to land that on the all-flash Hedvig storage platform. They want to land that on, let's say, a hard drive backed, lower cost, higher density development platform until they've released, or validated the 2.0 version of their product, at which point they will then release it. And that's an application approach that relies on capturing everything about the application, the metadata, which in the past was how many CPUs, how much RAM, but is now everything about a container and its persistent data. So I think the answer is both, and I think it really just depends on your development teams and your preference, as in how you like to move data around and whether you want that to be a always function, which is an ongoing replication, or something that you do on an ad hoc basis for a specific project need. But certainly lots and lots of food for thought there for those the development teams and the IT teams that are not only trying to keep the business, innovating and delivering those new modernized applications that can go from 100 users to 10,000 users in a week, but being able to protect that and have the data where it needs to be for resilience needs. So yes, migration always, as you say, comes with a data gravity problem that needs to be considered at development time now. So, yeah. So effectively what we've looked at today is that we've looked at, how you can design for enterprise scale and feature and function, how you can protect and then maintain, mobility and migration for those applications. And what we really want to stress here is, you've been doing a fantastic job of protecting your on-prem data centers, regardless of what workload lives in them today, really well. And you're probably getting your arms around how to do that in a cloud world. You need to deliver the same speed of recovery that you're delivering to your on-prem and cloud applications to your containerized apps. So you have developers building at speed. You now need to match that with recovery capability. And that's what that enterprise resilience is that we've been talking about today, that starts at the storage and moves all the way out through, into protecting and even replicating your workloads for things like DR. You need to consider that mobility is no longer a, every 3 to 5 to 7 year action. Mobility is actually something that's going to happen quite often. It's not a one-time task, and it's no longer going to be most likely coupled just to your infrastructure refresh events. It's going to be coupled to the capabilities that your developers want to deliver for the applications. So considering and planning for technology that aids in your mobility, like Hedvig's snapshot and replication capability, and like Commvault's ability to protect and then replicate your application and all of its data to wherever you need it, is really quite key. unified management. So it's quite interesting. We live in a DevOps world, and ideally your developers and operators would be together in the same team. That's not always the case depending on how your organization is laid out. But the key here for the organization to know that it is recovery ready, that it can bring back the business services in the time that it needs to, you need to have unified management. You need to have insight on how ready you are to recover across those developer workstations and source code control system and Kubernetes clusters and so on and so on. So make sure that you pick and implement technology like Commvault and Metallic that can give you that view across all of your data that contributes to your new modernized app landscape. Scale is something that we're starting to see as people adopt containerization. They're building, they're not building monoliths anymore. They're building web scale applications that can have just incredible success, right? Like look at Zoom, for example, on where it is today compared to where it was prior to the events of the world that are going on right now. They have had to scale to unplanned for levels of production volume, and that's based on building a web scale application with the backing of enterprise scale type features, which you're going to get out of solutions like Hedvig that can allow you to design for the volume that you're going to anticipate in whatever cloud you're landing in. And finally, you've got to do all of this while saving money, which is always like the last thing on the list from your boss. You need intelligent software. So not only do you want software that is going to just plug into your Kubernetes environments, auto discover those applications and tune protection, which is going to save you in headcount cost. You really need software that is both cloud and Kubernetes native so that it can constrain the amount of spend that you're incurring in these clouds. And Commvault has a number of technologies that optimize your spending cloud by turning systems off and on automatically, auto-scaling systems, and a number of other things that are focused on making sure that your cloud spend is not only minimal, but associated with the protection mechanisms that you feel are important for your business. So we've been doing this for a while now. We've been protecting Docker, Red Hat OpenShift, and now, quote unquote, all Kubernetes or all CNCF Kubernetes. So take it from us that you want to plan ahead, think about all of your data sources and how important they are, and not only protect them for recovery where they are today, but protect them for if that environment is not available, right? What happens if your data center goes out, or if you have an outage within the specific region or availability zone that you're in cloud? And that all comes down to replicating and mobility of your modernized containerized apps. So where do you go from here? Well, first things first, head off to metallic.io and just sign up. It is just too easy, right? It's like a 5-minute sign up, and you can start pointing it at your Kubernetes clusters and start protecting, right? And you can do this as a trial, no commitment, and just see how this works for you and your teams. It's quite refreshing to know that you can start protecting your environment without having to install a server and purchase operating systems and insert operating system keys and stuff like that. You can head off to commvault.com/containers for a look at Commvault's overall portfolio in the container space, and also get some pointers on what you should be considering. You'll also see a much more detailed demo than the introduction that we gave you today. So certainly head over there and take a look, but you can obviously be asking questions during the session today. Jump onto Commvault's newly launched Commvault community, and we have a virtual connection space there where you can ask questions and get connected with all the containerization gurus that we have kind of waiting to answer your questions here today. And that's a great place to continue the discussion and really be hooked into what Commvault's doing and actually what Commvault's customers are doing, right? Because there's nothing better than learning from a community and kind of bouncing ideas and solutions off one another to really kind of get a different perspective on how you can approach things. So I hope this has been fun today. I hope you've learned a lot, and if there are any questions, be sure to ask the questions now or hit the community so that Geeta and I can get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.